Taika Waititi is directing Akira. This has made a lot of people very angry, and was generally regarded as a bad move. But I find myself excited for this live-action adaptation for a lot of the same reasons that people are angry about it. To explain why, I need to talk about adaptations, what makes them enjoyable, what makes them disappointing, and why perfectly translating source material onto the screen is usually a bad idea. The Harry Potter movies are a great case study in adaptation, since they differ wildly in their approaches despite being based on books that, structurally and stylistically, are practically identical. Most people, including me, consider Prisoner of Azkaban to be the best of the film series. Which seems odd, because despite being picked out by a fandom famous for its pedantic nitpicking over details, it's nowhere near the most accurate book-to-screen translation. When put up against something like Half-Blood Prince, it pales in comparison in the amount of details included. Yet, despite this failing on a scale of literal translation, Azkaban has one important advantage. It feels the way the book does. Half-Blood Prince has most of the events of the source material, but because its runtime is so crammed, none of them feel significant. The reveal at the end of the book that Snape is the title character is a major wham line, the resolution to a mystery that has been one of the major focuses of the novel, and a turning point for the series as a whole, as Snape's high school career becomes an important factor in ultimately defeating Voldemort. In the movie, the same reveal feels like it comes out of nowhere, because it kind of does. The mystery of the Half-Blood Prince is mentioned.
Who's the Half-Blood Prince? Who? That's what it says right here. This book is property of the Half-Blood Prince.
But it has to fight for screen time with the love triangles, classroom antics, Horcruxes, vanishing cabinets, and Quidditch tryouts, all of which are given the same significance.
I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
The reveal scene is lifted almost directly from the book, but the context that made it matter is lost in the attempt to cram this movie's runtime with as much detail as humanly possible. Prisoner of Azkaban is less literally accurate, since lots of the subplots got cut out, but that means the most important events of the story are given enough focus that they feel the way they did in the book. The major themes can be emphasized, there's enough free space in the runtime to establish a tone, and the big reveal of this movie feels earned and important because there was enough time to effectively foreshadow it.
I'm warning you, Hermione. Keep that bloody beast of yours away from Scabbers, or I'll turn it into a tea cozy.
Ronald has lost his rat.
I haven't lost anything. Your cat killed him.
Rubbish.
Even if one avoids the cramming problem that Half-Blood Prince had, being a good adaptation is not guaranteed by accuracy. A good example of this is Watchmen, often cited as one of the best comic book adaptations because of its very literal translation of the comic book panels and dialogue. This movie is essentially a shot-for-shot, line-for-line remake of Alan Moore's graphic novel. But despite its long runtime allowing it to give proper significance and foreshadowing to all its plot points, it still doesn't feel anything like the comic book. The tone goes from very dreary, tired midlife crisis pondering to shiny, over-polished first-year philosophy student navel-gazing. The words and images are all the same, but they're being adapted by a director who clearly didn't fully understand their intent. Not only is a perfect translation not necessary for a good adaptation, it is not a guarantee for success. Another point at which perfect adaptation becomes pointless is when the source material becomes the only artistic voice in the project, and there's no real auteur driving the look and feel of the movie. The worst offender is the live-action Disney remakes. The directing style is either extremely boring and journeyman, or just uses shots directly lifted from the animation. Different mediums create different challenges, which means the works will be fundamentally different, and if there is no new creative voice to reconcile those differences, the gaps show. Look at the Prince Ali scene from the new Aladdin movie.
Show some respect, boy, genuflect, down on one knee.
The whole thing is just standard coverage, there's no energy. It feels like you're watching news coverage of a parade. They can't copy what the animated movie did, well, they could, but it would probably look super creepy, so they just did nothing. Now, imagine if this movie was directed by Baz Luhrmann, or whoever directed The Greatest Showman. Yeah, that guy. Their personal creative choices would probably mean the movie as a whole would deviate a lot further from the source material, but those creative gaps left by the transition between mediums would be filled, and you can bet your ass this scene would be entertaining as hell, if not exactly the same as the animated version. A great example of this done right is The Lord of the Rings. It's generally considered to be a really good adaptation, and yet it's still covered in Peter Jackson's fingerprints. There are many iconic elements of the movie that were created wholesale for the production with no reference pulled from the source material, like the aesthetics of the different countries, the cohesive look of the good guy and bad guy armor, and also this. Yeah, that definitely wasn't in the book. There are creative choices that come up in one medium that weren't necessary to make during the creation of the source material, and if there's no single creative voice helming the adaptation to make those decisions, the final product ends up feeling like less than the sum of its parts. Part of why I'm excited to see Taika take this project on is because of how much he makes the source material his own and his deep understanding of theme and tone.
It seems our father's solution to every problem was to cover it up.
Thor Ragnarok essentially threw out everything that made Thor iconic to the general public. Hammer, long hair, weird alien on Earth story, and in doing so was able to really explore the thematic aspects of his character that had been left behind in his previous appearances. Before this genuinely interesting comic book character had been reduced to beefy frat guy that talks funny.
You have no idea what you're dealing with.
Shakespeare in the Park? Doth mother know you weareth her drapes?
This is beyond you, Metal Man.
In a similar vein, most people's familiarity with Akira is with its iconic images. The red bike, the light trails, the guy with the metal arm, the big circular nuclear explosion, but not its story or themes. If I asked a random person at an anime con what they thought of Akira, they'd probably tell me that it's iconic and of course they love it. But if I asked them what Akira was about, I would probably get a much less confident answer. Which is not to disparage these people. Akira is rightfully remembered for its iconic animation and the influence that animation had on the anime and film industry. But that animation is not something that can be necessarily replicated in live action. Even if its visuals could be perfectly replicated in a way that didn't look weird or unnatural, these images that have been subjected to 3 decades of imitation and parody wouldn't be groundbreaking anymore. With Taika at the helm, we might get an adaptation that explores the core story, rather than just being a series of live-action recreations of the most iconic shots with none of the context that made them matter, like in Ghost in the Shell. I think when you're perfectly adhering to the source material, you're basically just making a live-action illustration of the book/comic book/cartoon. People aren't watching to enjoy the plot and characters, they're just there to see their favorite iconic moments play out with better graphics and then go home. A really good adaptation is something that pushes things further and becomes a property in its own right. A really interesting example of this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is a franchise that is relying less and less on its source material and more on its own unique internal canon. If you went back in time and showed the trailer to Avengers Endgame to a Marvel geek in 1995, it would probably take them a little while to realize that this was an ad for an Avengers movie. It's still a pre-sold franchise, but it's being sold on its own merits rather than on the merits of its source material. Hell, the whole plot for Spider-Man Far From Home is based on a relationship that does not exist in the comic books. And a Spider-Man whose personality differs wildly from the source material, yet it's a relationship that people care about, and it's a version of Spider-Man that people have become invested in. And when it comes down to it, that's the most important aspect of telling a story. At the end of the day, slavish attention to detail and Herculean efforts to perfectly recreate the source material are less important than finding and recreating the emotions and ideas that made the original work feel the way it did. While most bad adaptations have their failure blamed on the ways in which they deviated from the source material, it was probably not the deviations themselves, but the fundamental changes in tone and theme that they caused that alienated their fan bases. While some of these are genuinely so wildly different that they become unrecognizable, most of them turn off their fan bases because they just feel wrong. It wasn't that there were changes made, but that they were the wrong changes. And it's important to remember that no matter how much of an untouchable sacred cow the source material is, no matter how important it seems, no matter how many rabid fans are poised at the message boards, you're still telling a story. The same considerations of vision and direction and intention that are the standard boilerplate for an original work are also an indispensable aspect of the process of adaptation. Hi, thanks for watching my first video essay. I hope you had as much fun watching it as I had making it, and I hope to make more in the future. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover, or any mean comments you'd like to leave about my voice or my ideas or my IQ, feel free to throw them in the comment section. If you liked it, please like it. If you hated it, you can hire a hitman to come and kill me. Or just hit the dislike button. It's up to you. I'm not your dad.